Hey there, my name is Adam, and this is my RetroCon 2021 haul video. This is actually a companion piece to a video I already did over on another YouTube channel where I have a show that I participate in called Thrift Store Hoard. Normally, we show off all the fun treasures of yesteryear that we have found going to various thrift stores and antique stores. But this time around, we went to the ultimate thrift store. Yes, we made it to RetroCon 2021 in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. It was a great time. I was there the whole weekend and just, man, it is the type of place where you will find every toy from your childhood. And if you can afford it, you can reassemble your toy box. So if you want to see the rest of my haul outside of this particular video, go on over to the Retro Network YouTube channel and look for Thrift Store Hoard, and you will find that video over there. But in the meantime, I want to show you some of the fun stuff that I found in addition to what I showed on that video, because I was digging through bins. RetroCon is just the kind of place where if you can imagine it, it's probably hiding there for you. So speaking of things that were hiding, okay, so there was one particular bin that I went through and I started like noticing, I was like, oh, okay, there's something interesting in here I was not expecting to see. I'm a big comic book fan, and my favorite comic book of all time is Madman by Mike Allred. Oh, there went the holster. But this is a character called Frank Einstein. I love the design. I love the attitude of the comics. I love it all. This is a figure that I saw in my local comic book shop all the time, and I never picked it up. Okay, because wasn't die hard into Madman until the later years, and so I always saw it there, and I never picked it up. But at RetroCon, I found this guy. But then, guess who else I found? Another Madman. Yes, this was an alternate, which is one that had a rocket pack. Yeah. So this is another one that I remember seeing. You could actually buy these accessory sets that would have, extra pieces and things like that. And then you could attach them to the figure. Most exciting of all to me, though, was also finding the black suit Madman costume, this stealth look, his spy outfit. There are a ton more accessories than what I'm showing here, but to find them complete and with all the accessories to find everyone in the series, that was a big deal for me. That was like, something special that I felt I had missed out on. And now, hey, I'm back. Now, the other thing, you may have seen some of my other videos on this channel before where I've talked about VHS tapes. I have a podcast called Rental Return, Tales from the Video Store, where I interview like people who actually worked at video stores, my dream job that I never pursued for some reason. So I live vicariously through them. I'm an avid VHS collector. And one booth in particular had an old TV set up, had an old armchair, and a bunch of VHS tapes. I didn't pick them up because that's kind of what I normally do is I'm on the hunt for VHS. But one item was so unique, I had to buy it. And that was the VCR dust cover. Now, this feels like a conversation from Back to the Future Part 2, where they're talking about how they used to have dust jackets, before they invented paper that resisted dust and all that. But this is just one of those things that I thought was so fun. I have like 6 VCRs in my house because I watch my VHS tapes. I don't just collect them. And so to be able now to protect the one that I use the most with my VCR dust cover, that was just super novelty for me. Speaking of things collecting dust, so a lot of times at RetroCon or any con, you want to go under the table. Under the table is where the special stuff is. That's where the deals are to be found. And one deal in particular that really caught my eye was this carded DC Superheroes The Flash figure. Now, I had this as a kid. I actually had a variant one that had a little board, and you would put him on the board, and it had like smoke behind him, and you would pull it, then pew, it would zoom forward a little bit. But still, this was only $2. And if you look at the bottom, it's a little munched up here. There's a little bit of a crease in the card, but still, $2 for something that's basically complete in box. Like, I was very excited to see this. I've always loved this box design with the gold and the stars and everything. So I was very excited to have this again. It was just a super find for me, a good deal. Staying on the DC track, there was another table that just had these little Tupperware bins of random figurines. But the ones that caught my eye the most were these guys here. Now, these came out in 1989, around the time of the Batman film. They were kind of pushing all the DC characters. You got Batman and Robin here. I love how like they have their hands outstretched. I've actually thought if you just put them here and you got all the characters together, you could reproduce the Abbey Road cover by the Beatles, right? Also in the mix, although it was part of a different series, was this Penguin figure. And I remember seeing these guys around during that time when I was big on the, there you go, the Batman 89 hype. Batmania was in full effect. So that was a great thing. But somebody else who kind of had a resurgence briefly in the early 90s was James Bond, and James Bond Jr. was keeping the torch alive. This is one of those shows that's kind of forgotten. Not a lot of people talk about James Bond Jr., but I had a couple of the figures back in the day and I loved them. The one I had was like hot orange, like jumpsuit. I think he was like a parachute James Bond Jr., but this is the classic. And so I was really excited to add him. I have kind of a random 90s figures shelf, and this is going to go right there, prominently displayed. He's got his gun, which seems like maybe, is that more rare these days? Do toys still come with guns? I don't know. Now, another little guy that was just in a bin, the one and only Kid Vid from the Burger King Kids Club. I'm such a fan of the Burger King Kids Club. I have some other relics and stuff that I've saved from over the years. And I actually found a Burger King play place that still has all the Burger King Kids Club stuff up and on display and attached to it. That was a magical day for me. That was a great find. But staying on the figurines track, don't have a cow, man. But this is a little vintage keychain of Bart Simpson. I have a Simpsons collection of vintage stuff that I really love. And I recently found a big Bart plush doll. So this is a fun little addition to that. Speaking of little, staying small, this guy here, I don't know how many of you guys recognize Goofy. He looks kind of strange in this figure form. This was part of a Disneyland train set that I had when I was like 3 or 4. And they were like these big chunky yellow tracks, and they would go around to all the different Disneyland things. Like you'd have like the rockets from Tomorrowland and things like that. And when your train would pull up, it would actually activate the ride. And so I had this for many years, and then I eventually finally lost him. So to have Goofy back, it's extra special for me because I actually used to play Goofy at Disneyland in the costume for several years. And if you want to hear all those stories, you can find my podcast, which was called the Two Goofs podcast, where my best friend and I actually retold all our stories of working in costume, a little behind the scenes there, if you've always been curious. Great adventure. Speaking of another reclamation from my childhood, this guy, after all these years, I still don't know his name. He was part of the Robotech series of toys. I remember finding him in the clearance aisle at Toys R Us when I was like 6 or 7. And I just thought he had the coolest look. His robe, he looked so regal. And I didn't learn his name. I didn't buy any other Robotech figures, but he was like a precious member of my toy collection. And so now to have him back is fun. Plus, I'm going to see if he can still do this. Maybe not. Okay, maybe this one's not as good. He's not as damaged. I used to be able to flip his head around, and the back of his head is hollow. So there's just a hollow space there. And it always freaked me out, but I thought it was kind of cool. Also on the figurine front, I really get a kick out of Dick Tracy merchandise. There's just something about it that catches my fancy. Obviously, I loved the movie when it came out, but there was just such an abundance of merchandise that came out. And then the movie wasn't like a huge hit. So you see it all the time at antique malls. Like people just bought it when it was on clearance. These are guys I don't see as often though. And these are just these little PVC figurines, which like every movie, everybody had these back in the day. But I love having Dick Tracy, prune face, and flat top in this form because the action figures, which I also was able to pick up a few of, they didn't come with their like full suits on. And that always bugged me because I was like, they look so awesome in their suits. And they, didn't even come with cloth jackets or anything. So I felt like, that was a good justice to be served to the character design with that when you had the figurines. So I had to pick those up, add it to my Dick Tracy shelf over here. All right. The other cool thing about RetroCon is that you get to meet celebrities, right? Like they bring retro celebrities who starred in your favorite films and cartoons and things, and you can interact and have that moment. In the past, I've met like Rob Paulson, who voiced Yakko on Animaniacs, and also, of course, Raphael on the original Ninja Turtles, among many, many other cartoons. But this time around, I was actually able to meet another star of animation for me, which was Dan Galvezon, who was the voice of Peter Parker in Spider-Man on Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. I mean, that was just a huge entry point for me into loving comic books and an introduction to superheroes. And so to have him sign here and add Spidey, to there, I mean, he knows how much he means in his work. He also was Bumblebee on Transformers. And I have an original Transformers VHS, those big boxes. I have several of those, and I brought it for him to sign, but then I was like, I think I'll just go with Spider-Man because it's like $50 per autograph. And I think one is just fine. But somebody who was also super awesome to meet there was none other than Terry Kaiser, yes, Bernie himself from Weekend at Bernie's. So I've had this tape in my collection. I said, let's make it official. Let's have it signed by Bernie. So it was very fun to talk to Terry Kaiser. I actually asked him about another film of his, maybe less known, which is Mannequin 2 on the Move. And he played the bad guy of that. He had this huge mole that was like really hairy and it hung down. It was gross. And so I asked him, I said, was that in the script or was that your choice? He was like, oh, that was all me. And I was like, I knew it, because that is a very actorly choice. You want all the attention on you. You want to have something to do on screen and look interesting. So that was very fun to get that information from him. Speaking of, though, going back to like the reclaiming your youth, right? That's what nostalgia is all about. You want to go back, you want to find those things that meant something special. One booth had this hanging up, and the minute I saw it, I was 7 years old again. I had this cling. This is like a window cling. It's just like a little piece of plastic on my bedroom window when I was a kid until I was about 12. And so like just this whole design just like is seared into my memory because I saw it every day and every night. But also it included just the straight bat signal, which is this the kind of thing you would put on your car probably if you had a car at the time. But I was just a kid. The only glass thing I owned was my window in my room. So that was very awesome to get that piece of my history back. Speaking of comics, we're talking about all these comic book heroes and everything. There was a great booth there that had like some very fun signs where they actually drew pictures and made jokes about comics history and stuff in there. And so I was able to pick up a stack of comics that really caught my eye. I have another podcast, so many podcasts. I love to talk, obviously, called Wizards, the podcast guide to comics. And with that, I actually re-examine the 90s comic book boom, through the pages of Wizard Magazine. This is a part of my collection here and behind me, my Wizard magazines. And so I was able to grab some of the comics that we talk about in those issues. The first of which was actually really cool here. There is a celebrated run of comics called Starman. Starman, you probably heard of Stargirl, that you've seen on HBO Max these days if you're watching it, but it's kind of a legacy hero. There was a Starman way back in the early days of comics in the golden age, and this is his son. But what was very fun is this is so celebrated, but I'd never read it after all these years. So I was actually able to pick up the first 10 issues. And that was really great because I like to have the physical books. There's digital comics these days and I read them when I have to. But if I could have the physical book, look at the ads, just remember that time and place, like that's exciting. So this is something I'm catching up on in my comic collecting. Something I had on my own back in the day, but now I've got another version of it to re-examine and revisit is DV8. Now I'm a big fan of the comic book Gen 13 that had art by J. Scott Campbell. You might know him. Well, this was a spin-off where they were kind of like the evil Gen 13. If you think like the New Mutants and then the Hellions, if you know about comic book history of the X-Men universe, these guys are basically the Hellions. It didn't catch on. It didn't have quite the same attitude as Gen 13. So I didn't read very long, but I wanted to revisit again just to double check and be like, okay, is there something I missed? Is it redeemable? Something I don't think is redeemable, but I'm going to read it anyway. Rob Liefeld, he produced a lot of comics back in the day, back in the 90s. That was his heyday. And he would have all these new upstart guys come and do comics for him. And his names often revolved around blood. And to the point, he created Deadpool, and he also created a thing called Blood Strike. So he decided to put them together. Blood Pool. Yeah, Blood Pool Comics. It's some sort of team comic. I just heard it mentioned in an issue of Wizard. I'm going to read about it, find out what Blood Pool could possibly mean, aside from trying to get that name recognition for stuff you've already done. Also, this is just a piece of comics history for people who maybe don't know, but Malibu Comics had this thing called the Ultraverse, and they started getting pretty popular. And then Marvel Comics bought out the whole company and took their characters, and Marvel started creating Ultraverse comics. And so this was one of those when they kind of were rebooting. This is a character called Rune in the Marvel style. In fact, they actually had Ultraverse and Marvel characters cross over eventually. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, so another one that I was able to pick up at a booth was Concrete. Concrete is a great story about a political speechwriter who then gets his brain transplanted by aliens into a giant concrete body. Sounds weird, and it is, but this is like the most mellow comic book you've ever read, because it's about this guy just trying to say, well, I'm in this big body now. What do I do? What good can I do in the world? I have a lot of the collected editions, but this was the first issue of the ongoing series by Dark Horse that they released. So that was exciting to find. Also got a copy of Solar Man of the Atom, but this was by Dan Jurgens. They did kind of a reboot later on in 1995, and Dan Jurgens was responsible for a lot of the Death of Superman stuff that you remember. And then he decided to jump ship and say, I've done a lot of Superman. Let me do something else. So curious to see Dan Jurgens' take on that. Also here, this is another fly-by-night company, but they had big names. Leonard Nimoy, yes, he had a comic book called Primortals. That was from Techno Comics. Also, Neil Gaiman. You know Neil Gaiman? Well, he had Mr. Hero, the Pneumatic Man. I actually have the first issue of this. It's a pretty fun story. I'm looking forward to getting a little bit later down the line. Going back to Image, Hell Shock. Yeah, there's a hot artist. His name is Jay Lee. I read the first issue. It was a very short issue. I was kind of disappointed. I want to get the rest of the story. Let me see what goes on here. Also, this is a crossover between Marvel and Top Cow Studios, Mark Silvestri's company. This is Elektra and Cyblade. Okay, so it was the era of the bad girl comics. Everybody wanted a piece of that pie. Another really cool thing that I found, I'm a big fan of these audio drama tapes that were released in the early 90s, late 80s. And what they were was they were adaptations of existing comics. So John Byrne in 1986, he rebooted Superman with this miniseries called The Man of Steel. These are pretty cool. I always love those silhouettes. And so what they did was they basically did actors acting out the comic with sound effects and music and everything, and you could listen along. So I have all the tapes, but I didn't have all the comics. So I was able to grab a few more that I needed. And also I have a full set of Batman comics as well in that same style that I'm a big fan of. So that was great to complete that collection. A few more just random ones here. I picked up this cool issue of The Punisher because it introduces a female Punisher in these pages, as I understand it, but also just like you have this metallic knife, and it's all bloodied. And I also got an issue of What If Danny Ketch's sister became the Ghost Rider instead of Danny Ketch? Danny Ketch was the Johnny Blaze from the movies, but Danny Ketch was the Ghost Rider in the 90s. So it's kind of fun to see what that alternate reality would have been. Now, staying on the Marvel track, I'll show these last things to you. Marvel also wanted to get everybody's attention in the 90s. So they decided to jump on the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition bandwagon and create the Marvel swimsuit special. Okay, so Rogue made the cover twice. She was very popular, but also you got Storm there. And on the first cover, I believe was actually She-Hulk. I got to pick that one up, but somebody had these in their bin. It was fun to get a trio of them. They're really a hoot. They have fake ads. They kind of create a story for the photos. But yeah, but it's equal guys in Speedos and girls in bikinis. You know, that's just what they did over there. But the last comic book that I was able to pick up, pull it out of the bag here. This is kind of neat. This is another fly by night company. Most people probably don't remember. They did their best in the mid 90s to kind of become a thing. They were called Broadway Comics, and this is one of theirs called Fatale. And Broadway Comics, what they were trying to do, there's actually two different editions of the first issue here, is they were kind of telling movie stories but in comic book form, so they're almost more like storyboards in a lot of ways. Like they really wanted to sell it almost like a TV show that you could adapt really easily. Now obviously they have a very buxom heroine here in Fatale, but I was at a table and I bought something from a guy, and then I noticed under his table, always look under the table, he had a box of comics. I started flipping through there, and they said free comics on the box. He's like, yeah, my buddy, he's got a whole stack of these in his garage, so I'm just trying to help him get rid of them. You could also spin a wheel if you bought something from him, and then you might win like a $10 credit or something. And I landed on free comics, but I had already grabbed the free comics, so that's what I walked away with. But RetroCon's very fun for those types of things. But I mean, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I'm missing that I grabbed there. But like I say, if you want to see the rest of my RetroCon haul, I suggest you go over to the Retro Network YouTube channel, look for Thrift Store Horde. You'll see the rest of my awesome Power Rangers collection that I picked up there and a couple other things. And I just want to say, hey, thanks for checking it out. And if you've never been to RetroCon, I really recommend you check it out. If you're on the East Coast, all the easier for you to get to Pennsylvania. If you're on the West Coast like me and you're going to make the trip, it is worth it. If this is the world you live in, you love the treasures of the past, you love the nostalgia, then I really suggest you check it out for yourself. So, hey, until next time, keep living in the past, man.